Hey there everybody, it's markcrilley. I'm back with another how to draw video. Back in January I did a video on one-point perspective, using it to create an interior space. Some of you may remember it was a subway car interior. This time I'm going to use two-point perspective to do an interior space. People like to know the size I'm working at, so I'll just quickly tell you it's about 4 3/4 inches in height. That comes out to exactly 12 centimeters. And then for the distance from the width of it, what is that? 21.5 centimeters, which is 8.5 inches from side to side. Now you can see we've got this very straight horizon line here, the line where the earth meets the sky, basically. And I've got the 2 points of two-point perspective fame. One point way over here, very near the edge of my frame, and then this one actually outside of the frame. Very common, actually, for me to have at least one of the points be outside of the frame. And later on we're going to be zooming in, and you won't even see that point anymore, but I wanted you to know at the beginning where it was in relation to the rest of the frame. Well, I'm going to go ahead and put down some basic guidelines to begin to define this interior space. Okay, so here you can see I've made a very wide rectangular shape, which is going to be a sort of opening at the far end of this room. I'm imagining something a little bit like a big open warehouse, although really it'll look more like the interior of the Death Star by the time I'm done with it, if all goes well. And I just wanted to sort of point out how each one of these lines, these sort of horizontal lines, are actually receding towards this point way over here, the bottom one and the top one. This vertical line is really just going straight up and down, as it generally does in a two-point perspective drawing. Well, I want to show you the next part in which I use this point to make lines coming off here to define and create a wall over on this side. Alright, so you can see how this point told me where to put these lines, basically using the ruler. And I do advise using a ruler when you're trying to do a true two-point perspective drawing like this. Very important to get very straight lines that really relate directly to these points. Now I'm erasing this line because this is going to be a sort of solid wall here, whereas this is an opening that allows us to look off towards the horizon. I think it's time now to begin adding a little more support structure maybe to this interior space. I'm going to put maybe 1, 2, 3 different pillars here way over on this wall. Okay, so I just sort of eyeballed these 3 different lines, putting them in there, not concerning myself too much with the amount of distance between them. But I guess real time I can show you real quickly how I would use this point here as a sort of a pivot point, lining it up with one of those lines, and this would allow me to continue this support structure across the ceiling, like so. And basically right now I'm going to do the same thing across the ceiling and across the floor, so as just to give myself some more structural lines to begin finishing out the space. So you can see how the lines begin to fan out, and really what happens is while they're in the distance, the difference between each line in terms of angle is rather minor. The closer you get, the more drastically, as you're making it agree with that point, these lines begin to really fan out in a pretty dramatic way. Now, what I want to do is add a little more structure to this sort of pillar thing over here, and then maybe also extend that across to create sort of wider, thicker ceiling support structures. Okay, so I decided a little unusually to add some shading at this early stage, mainly just to help you see what these lines are supposed to be. I was afraid there's just too many lines here, and there wasn't very much clarity to what it was I was doing. In any case, you can see that these are support structures here going across, and so far, really, each and every line is relating to this dot way over here on the left. Now what I want to do is show you how I could put in a series of 3 sort of pillars right here on this other side of the drawing, which will help to give it considerably more depth. Okay, so this time I've got lines that are going off to this point in the distance. It's going to help me line up these three support structure columns so that they, line up in a realistic way. Now, what I'm doing right here is sort of indicating the bases of each one of these columns, and as you would expect, they get smaller as they recede into the distance. And in keeping with this vertical structure here for all of the vertical lines, I can just go ahead and drop in vertical lines, this one connecting to this connecting to the second one, the third one connecting to the third. All right, so you can see how getting these basic guidelines in place on the floor allowed me to get the columns to line up in proper perspective. You may have noticed that I actually had to erase a little bit here. I noticed that my so-called vertical line was decidedly lacking in verticality. So I have again decided to shade in, even though some of this will probably have to go away, but I needed to, or I wanted you to see what it was that I was doing, and I thought adding the shading would help me to do that. Well, I think it might be interesting to fill in this area over here on the left with a foreground structure that's a little bit different from what we see here. So what I've got here is kind of a large door-like opening, and I'm erasing away again so the horizon line, different lines that are not really needed. But again, just to sort of point it out, every one of these lines is relating to that vanishing point. That's how you get these structures to really look like they're in proper perspective. Apart from the vertical lines, every one of these lines is either relating to this point or to that point, at least in a very strict geometric kind of 90-degree angle filled structure such as this. Well, one of the things that I wanted to teach with this video was how to show a character of a certain height standing in the foreground, and then another character in the distance, and to make sure that they are of similar height, that they fit in the same world. So I'm going to begin by kind of quickly sketching in a figure standing here in the foreground. All right, well, unfortunately, I can't make this a video about how to draw this particular figure, but suffice to say, if you draw a character of your own creation standing in the foreground, and then you want to draw a secondary character way off in the background, you'll certainly want it to be able to fit into the same world. You don't want to draw this character too small or too large. So I want to show you how you can figure this out. If you choose a spot here on the ground where he's going to be standing and establish that's where the feet are going to be, then really it's a simple matter of taking that dot in the distance, figuring out this guy's height, right? And then, you don't even have to draw the line all the way across. You can just sort of see how his head lines up there, and then down here somewhere, that's the height of that other character's head. You don't want to make him any taller than that, if indeed you want him to be precisely the same height. You can play around with different heights for your characters, of course, but I thought for the purposes of simplicity, keep these characters almost the same height. Well, I'm going to go ahead and sketch in that other character right here. So there you go, my two different characters sort of facing off. Star Wars fan that I am, I couldn't resist going ahead and giving them lightsabers so that they can face off in this big climactic final. Part of my weird movie in my head. But what I want to do now is begin to sort of flesh out these structures a little. They're very flat looking, of course, and I thought if I added maybe something a little more like diagonal lines up here, they might look a little, just have a little more depth to them. So I think you can see where I'm going with this, adding in this slightly octagonal looking structure here. But I did want to point out that anytime you add a structure like that, then you're going to have to line up as you draw the, companion pieces on these other things. It takes patience, it must be said, to do a proper two-point perspective drawing, because you're constantly having to make sure that everything lines up. And trust me, very often it doesn't line up. Well, I'm going to take a moment to add just a few more sort of structural elements as we move closer to completion on this illustration. Okay, so I added this sort of pipe along the ceiling. I added a square there. You can see I also decided to finally zoom in, and you can't see the point over on the left anymore, but you know that I'm still using the ruler to draw lines that relate to it. I wanted to point out about how I've decided to add a kind of almost beveled sort of edge here to the ceiling, and a sort of interesting thing is going to happen, and I have to admit that I'm sort of winging this here, but since this is a diagonal line here, you would normally just draw a bunch of diagonal lines across here to indicate the surface. But I believe what's going to happen is as we get closer to this point on the horizon, those lines begin to relate to that point, so that you really do need to sort of have it gradually change. Kind of tricky to do, and I don't know if there's probably some mathematical way of doing it, but I do believe that as you got closer to this point, you'd end up with a straight up and down line right by that point, and then it would begin to expand in the opposite direction. I'm going to go ahead and sort of draw these lines a little more clearly with the ruler, and then also add a bit of an extra structure over here, maybe up here as well. Okay, well, you can see I've added quite a lot of extra stuff, and, you know, this video was never going to be one in which I expected people to follow along in a super line-by-line way. Hopefully, maybe you can get the basic structure in place and then play around with it, add the sort of details that you want to. I mean, people looking at me adding all this stuff may wonder, well, how do you know? How do you know to put that there? And you know, the truth is I don't. I'm just sort of playing around. I'm adding lines here and there, just according to where I think something is needed. Like up here, I thought, what, you know, it seems a little blank up there. What if there's this kind of chute, you know, through which some third person can descend at a crucial moment during the lightsaber battle. But basically, the key at this stage is to add lines that give form to a lot of these structures, while also keeping in mind that you don't want to overdo it. You don't want to just keep adding more and more until you kind of suck all the life out of your drawing. And that is always a tricky line to know. Where do you stop? When is it time to just lay off the detail and finish up the illustration? Well, what I'm going to do is add just a few more tiny little details, bearing in mind that I do want to stop at some point, and then do what I did in that last video. I'm going to scan it into my computer. I'm going to do a printout in which I've heightened the contrast, maybe you know, pushed the hue into a different direction, make it maybe more blue or brown or something like that, and then we'll be able to come back and use my mighty gouache to finish off this illustration. So bear with me. The next thing you're going to see is a computer printout version of this same illustration once I've added just a few more finishing details. Okay, so I finished up with all the details and shading. I scanned it into my computer, and I used Photoshop to greatly heighten the contrast. Now, you don't need to have Photoshop, which is quite an expensive program. Any photo editing program, basically anything like that, will allow you to heighten contrast and probably also move the, adjust the hue. I made it sort of a bluish, purplish color. So, hopefully if you want to try this technique, this has nothing to do really with the two-point perspective. It's just sort of a fun way of adding a sense of light. And what I've got here is white gouache. Those of you who watch my videos, I love to add white gouache to things. And I'm going to come over here with the white gouache. And as I told you, I meant for this to be a sort of an exterior back here. The more I think about it, I'm wondering if this is not some Death Star-like outpost on the surface of Tatooine. Like they decided to build something. Well, we brought that sort of Death Star vibe to it, but we also wanted to bring in just a little of that Tatooine feel. Mostly in the palette, I think. In any case, I'm not exactly sure where I'm going with this, but I thought by heightening the, by putting the white out here for like the sands of the desert, that is going to create this great blinding, source of light in the distance that should make for a pretty dramatic image. And as I said, this video is certainly not one of my line-by-line videos. This is more, I would say, two things: showing you how you use two-point perspective to construct an interior space of any kind, really, and then also maybe showing you the order in which I do things. You'll note that I always start with a really basic, boxy kind of a thing, that has almost no details at all, and then generally speaking, I'm waiting until the very end to add the smallest details. There's sort of like mid details, like a structural thing like that came in at around the halfway point. Basically, the bigger the thing that you're adding, I'd say, the sooner it comes, and the smaller it is, like little things like this, that comes in towards the tail end of the process. Well, I'm going to go ahead and in time-lapse finish off adding whitewash highlights to this image, and then we can be back with a few final words. Alright, well, there's my video on how to use two-point perspective to create an interior space, and I think I will almost certainly continue with this at some point in the future, do a three-point perspective video as well. But for now, let me go ahead and thank anyone who has supported me by getting any of my books, like Brody's Ghost, Miki Falls, my two graphic novel series, as well as Mastering Manga and Mastering Manga 2, and coming out next week, Brody's Ghost number 6. Haven't got my copies yet, but as soon as I do, I will be opening up that big box of books and thanking you all for sticking with me for the entirety of that series. But let's go ahead and lay down this pencil. I want to thank you all for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back with another one real soon.